Shanto Yav Panjaram Janmamayam Vidarya Vivesha Nirvrityatavim Prashantam Tam Shastranagam Shirasa Namami. So what I just recited is a verse by Yashomitra. Yashomitra is a commentator of Vasubandhu. So he wrote a great commentary on the Abhidharmakosha Bhashya, and this verse is a praise of a Buddha. The Buddha here is compared to an elephant. And you might know some ideas which are in this verse, because you usually find them in the Wheel of Existence type of Thanga. Sometimes we have one sentence which says, break out from samsara like an elephant breaking a small hut. So there's a similar idea here. So in this verse, the Buddha is described as an elephant. How is he? He's Mahabalo. Mahabalaha means he has great strength. But this obviously is a reference to the Buddha is Dashabala. He has the 10 strengths, which are a special feature of the Buddha. And he has 2 tusks. Elephants have 2 tusks. His 2 tusks are Jnana and Samadhi. This refers to Shamatha and Vipassana. So he uses these 2 tusks of Shamatha and Vipassana. What does he do? Janma Panjaram Janmamayam Vidarya. He destroys Vidarya, the cage of birth. So this refers to birth and death, to the whole of samsara. So how does the Buddha do that? With Shamatha and Vipassana. And what does he do? He goes into the forest. Which forest? The forest of liberation, the forest of nirvana. How is that forest? It's peaceful. So the Buddha is like an elephant who was in a cage, but he used these 2 tusks, and he used that to break that cage and go into the forest of nirvana. And then Yashomitra says, I bow with my head to that elephant among the teachers. So among all teachers, the Buddha is an elephant. It means he's a very, very great, remarkable teacher. So this is the meaning of the verse that I recited, which is a kind of auspicious beginning. One reason I have recited that verse is that today's explanation, 5 aggregates, the bases and entrances, comes from the tradition of Vasubandhu. So you're aware of who Vasubandhu was? You heard the name Vasubandhu before? Yes. So you already know that Vasubandhu was sometimes called second Buddha. The Buddha, because in this world he propagated the teachings so much that it looked like he was doing the same activities as the Buddha. So in that sense, they call him as if he's a second Buddha. So Vasubandhu is the younger brother of Asanga. You heard this? Asanga was the one who received the Maitreya treatises, which are Yogacara treatises. But Vasubandhu, until his brother convinced him, was not a Yogacara philosopher. So he was not a Mahayana philosopher. He was initially a Kashmiri Vaibhashika, and then he leaned towards Sautrantika. So the Abhidharmakosha, if you just read the verses, they just describe the Kashmiri Vaibhashika position. Okay, first of all, do you know what is Vaibhashika? Have you heard of this word? No? Okay. If you haven't, you can tell me. You can explain. So there is a very long Indian tradition of classifying the whole of Buddhist thought into 4 schools: Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Yogacara, and Madhyamaka. The first 2 schools usually are considered to be Shravakayana schools or Hinayana schools. They're not Theravada, don't get confused. Some people just substitute the word Hinayana with Theravada, thinking that it's more polite. Actually, that's wrong. These two words don't mean the same thing. Hinayana is a path and is a synonym with Shravakayana and Pratyeka Buddhayana, and Theravada is a school. They're different things. So we should not confuse these two things. So the Vaibhashika and Sautrantikas are schools, just like the Theravada is a school, and all of these can be considered to be predominantly Shravakayana schools. Otherwise, we can say Hinayana. I think it's not a big problem because the term is found in the Buddhist texts themselves, and there is a context where the term is not such a derogatory term as people think. It's not so negative. It has its context and it has its reason to exist. So, these schools, these Shravaka schools, you might be familiar mostly with the Theravada, because now that's the Shravaka school that is still surviving as an independent school. But in India, that was not a very popular school. So the Theravada school is popular where? In Southeast Asia. In India, there's scarcely a trace of Theravada. So when we think of Indian Buddhism, Sarvastivada is a much more popular school, and Vaibhashika is their philosophical output. So why do we call Vaibhashika? What's the meaning of Vaibhashika? Vaibhashika means a follower of the Vibhasha. Vibhasha means the great commentary. The great commentary is a very large Abhidharma commentary, which should be a commentary primarily, I think, on the Jnana Prasthana, which is one of the 7 Abhidharma texts of the Sarvastivada. So somebody wrote this very large commentary, and those who follow that commentary are called Vaibhashika. Then the Vaibhashikas became divided into different sub-schools. The one which was considered more orthodox was the Kashmiri Vaibhashika. So the Vaibhashikas who stayed in Kashmir. One of the characteristics of the Vaibhashika is that they believe in the existence of the dharmas in the 3 times. That's one reason they're called Sarvastivada. They have the doctrine that the past exists, the future exists too. The difference between past, present, and future is only in whether something has already performed its function or not. But that particular entity exists. Even the past entity exists. When the future entity already exists, it becomes a present entity while it is performing its function, and when it has exhausted its function, it becomes a past entity, but it continues to exist. So this is one of the important Sarvastivada ideas, which is quite unique. The Vaibhashikas believe that these Abhidharma texts were actually taught by the Buddha himself. Although they believe that they had been taught in a scattered way, and then they had been collected by great Shravakas. The Sautrantikas, on the other hand, have a different idea. They're called Sautrantika because they follow the Sutranta. Sutranta is the same as Sutra. So what they mean is that they think that the Abhidharma texts were just composed by somebody, not the Buddha. So they thought that the Buddha taught Abhidharma, but he taught Abhidharma in some specific sutras, like the sutra called Artha Vinishaya Sutra, from which this passage. Okay, so this sutra is where we got this passage from. So this sutra has a commentary called Nibandhana, and this commentary has the same content, more or less, as the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya, this text by Vasubandhu, which includes both Vaibhashika and Sautrantika positions, but in an easier way. So it's a bit more accessible. So today I'm going to use the text to comment upon what we are going to learn on the this part. Okay. The other two schools are Yogacara and Madhyamaka. And these are considered to be predominantly Mahayana schools. So they have certain differences in terms of their philosophy. They emphasize the idea that in some sense, the aggregates, bases, and entrances themselves are unreal. So this is one of the basic differences. So one basic difference between the two Shravaka schools and the Mahayana schools is that in some sense, for the Shravaka schools, both of them, and actually this is also true of Theravada Vedanta at least, the aggregates, bases, and entrances for them are real. For the Mahayana school, in some sense, they are unreal, they're illusory. So this is one of the big differences. So, in the Shravaka schools, the analysis stops there. If I perceive the skandhas from the perspective of the Shravaka schools, that's an authentic perception. It's an unmistaken, authentic perception. If I perceive a person, that's not an authentic perception. But if I perceive the aggregates, that's an authentic perception. For the Mahayana schools, even the perception of the skandhas somehow is not an authentic perception. So this is the difference, to put it very, very briefly. So, are you already familiar with what are the 5 aggregates? Have you heard these lists before?
Yes.
Okay. Nevertheless, I would like you to chant the lists. So our first task today is to chant. We will chant this short sentence, and by chant, it's a very simple procedure. I say something, you repeat it. Panchaskandhaha Rupam Vedana Samya Samskaraha Vijnanam Cheti. Okay, and here there is some kind of translation. The translations for the skandhas are very difficult because if you read any 2 books on Buddhism, they will use 5 different terms to translate the skandhas. There's no consistency. So it's quite useful if you can learn the words for the skandhas in at least one Buddhist language. Your pick. Sanskrit, Pali, Chinese, Tibetan, anything is okay. English is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because there's no consistency. You read 2 books and you don't even know they're talking about the same thing. Then it's a little bit disorientating. So this is one possible set of translation. Actually, I translated with formation, which is not good. I don't know why I did that. I usually translate samskaraha as co-producing factor. But, okay, I will give you a very brief explanation now. So, the way we are going to go about today's talk is that first I will give a very brief explanation, which will already sound very long to you. And then I'm going to give you a longer explanation, which will be unbearable. So in this way, you just take it by degrees. And the skandha dhatu on ayatana itself is in the same way. The skandha is the shortest explanation. So first I give you some idea of what the skandhas are. So what do the skandhas include? The skandhas include all the entities, which here we call dharmas. Why do we call them dharmas? Do you know why we call entities dharmas? because they have certain characteristics. So the explanation is Swa Lakshana Dharana Dharma. Because they bear Dharana, certain characteristics of their own. Swalakshana, they're called Dharma. So Dharma comes from the root Dhr, which means to have or to bear. All the entities are recognizable because they have certain features. That's why we can even perceive them or distinguish them. So when we study Abhidharma, the point of Abhidharma is to distinguish these features. That's the whole point. Normally we don't. Normally we only perceive our own projections and concepts. We are convinced that it's our own direct experience, but it isn't. According to the Abhidharmika, what is happening is that we just mix up all the actual features of the entities and we create our own concept about it. Because of that, we suffer. So in brief, the point about Abhidharma is that it teaches the proper features of the entities so that we can start reflecting and meditating on them so that we don't have misconceptions, so that we counteract the kleshas, we counteract the mental defilements. So the purpose of classifying and understanding the features of the dharmas is counteracting the mental defilements of raga, dvesha and moha, attachment, aversion and confusion. And what is the main point? The main point is the confusion about the self. So the point is, normally what we are actually experiencing is something like the 5 skandhas. But the way we experience it is as a person. So all our experiences are with this conviction that there is a person. The purpose of the Abhidharma is to destroy this conviction, because this conviction is the basis of samsara. One of the most basic classifications, which we should maybe start even before we go into these 3, is the distinction between nama and rupa. Do you know what is nama and what is rupa? Nama is awareness. Any type of awareness. Awareness of an object or awareness of the features of an object. So, anything which can take a point of reference. The activity of cognizing something, that is nama. It can be just merely cognizing the object, just knowing that something is there, then it is just chitta or mind, or it can be a cognition of its features and our feelings about it. Then it is chaitas, mental derivatives. So this is the basic classification of nama. Most importantly, we should remember that some of the characteristics of nama are that anything which belongs to nama, in order to arise, needs a point of reference, a support. So we need to be cognizing something. That's one feature. Second feature is, it doesn't have any shape. It's not located anywhere. It's not something located in space. So when we talk about nama, it's not something that it is here or there or there or there. It has no place. It has no physical extension. So these are very important characteristics that we have to keep in mind. I'm mentioning this because in my past experience, somehow at that time I used to get shocked a little bit. Now I don't. I noticed that many people, when they hear the word mind, what they actually think about is the brain. Many people, every time they hear the word mind or consciousness, they think the brain working like some kind of computer or something like that. That's not the Buddhist meaning of mind. The brain is rupa, it's not nama. The brain has a physical location. The brain doesn't perceive anything. So, what we're talking about is not the brain. This we have to keep in mind. We're talking about mind or consciousness. It doesn't have a location in space. It doesn't have a physical presence. It exists as much as this table, no more nor less. From a Buddhist point of view, that's a very important point. The level of existence of the mind and the level of existence of the table at least is the same. According to some, the mind exists even at a higher level. But at the very least, it exists all the same. So nowadays, many people think we decide what exists or not according to whether we can see it. This is their mentality. That, from a Buddhist point of view, is completely wrong. So if you think that you decide what exists just by seeing it or by having many people checking, maybe making an experiment, that's completely against Buddhist philosophy. That would be considered a Charvaka position. Charvakas were Indian materialists. They believed that even consciousness is nothing but something that comes from the physical elements. And this is the position which is most criticized in the Buddhist tradition. Of all the possible forms of wrong view, that's the worst possible form of wrong view. This is emphasized in the Buddhist text again and again and again. And I'm mentioning this because my big shock in the past was, I talked to a Buddhist audience, many of them turned out to be Charvaka. Like when I told them that when I say the mind, I don't mean the brain, they just got a headache. They came and asked me later, what do you mean? The mind is the brain. We're very convinced. It's very clear. We all know it. Well, if we all know it, that means we all don't know Buddhist philosophy at all. Because this is a common point of all the Buddhist schools. So this is something, if you want to understand the Skandhadhatu and Ayatana, which are like the ABC of Buddhism, then at the very least, keep that in mind, that the mind here doesn't mean the brain. From the Buddhist definitions, the mind and the mental factors are not placed somewhere in space, and they do not have a physical presence. So this point, simple point, basic point of Buddhist philosophy, my great dismay was, some people don't even know this. To me, complete shock. But now I don't get shocked anymore. Okay, so when we want to subdivide more, Nama and Rupa, so Nama and Rupa, if you refer it to just one person, so you refer to the Adhyatmika, the personal Nama Rupa, you can say it refers to the body and mind. Nama we translate as name, but actually it's explained differently. It's explained as coming from the root nam, which means to bend. So why is it called Nama? For two reasons. In terms of moment by moment, it bends towards its object. So this is an important idea about mind and mental derivatives. They go towards an object. That's what they are. It's this tension towards an object, going towards an object. And in terms of how they work through time, they bend towards a new birth. Why? When there is a new birth, it's not the body that takes the new birth. The continuum of the body completely ceases. The continuum of our body completely ceases. Our body disperses. So what happens? The continuum of the mind is the one that links this birth to the next birth. So that's why it bends towards a new realm of existence. From one birth to the next. That's why Nama, from bending towards. Rupa is so called from rupyate in the sense of badhyate. It is blocked or refashioned, even by the hand. So for example, if you take your hand and there is rupa, I can move this computer up and down. It changes shape, it can be shaped. You cannot do that with the mind. You cannot catch the mind with the hand and shape it. So this is one difference. So this is the difference between nama and rupa. So when we look at the first classification, the 5 aggregates, skandha means an aggregate, or even better, a heap. Like when you heap up many things. That's the more common meaning. There's some other meanings, but this is the more common one. And the 5 aggregates are a way to see that what we normally perceive as a person is a collection of different entities. Some of these entities belong to rupa and some belong to nama. So some of them are insentient and some of them are awareness. In the aggregate, we put all the rupa under one aggregate. So the first aggregate is the aggregate of rupa. So all our sense faculties and the place where they stay, all this is rupa, is the personal rupa. And then there is a classification of mind and mental factors. First we have 3 mental factors, vedana, samnya, and sanskara. Vedana is feeling or experience, which can be of 3 types, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So when our mind arises and perceives an object, that perception is always accompanied by some kind of feeling, whether this feeling is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Samnya means something like a notion. That's when we recognize what we are perceiving, or we form a notion about it. So when we perceive a patch of blue, we have this notion that it's a patch of blue, for example. Samskara is all the other types of mental attitudes that we might have towards that object. And as we will see in the Vaibhashika, this includes something more, but I'm not going to mention that now. And Vijnana, usually translated as consciousness, is just the perception that something is there, without even having this notion of what it is, but just the perception that something is there, that very bare perception, is Vijnana. So that's the subtlest aspect of nama. That's why it's taught last. It's the simplest. If I explain it, it's a short explanation, but they say it's very difficult to recognize. It's easier to recognize feeling. Like if you try to bang your head on the wall, you can recognize that you have some unpleasant feeling on your head. That's quite straightforward. Samnya, notion is a little bit more difficult, but not so difficult. You turn around, you see a clock, you get the notion clock. Samskara, a little bit more difficult because it includes a bit more, and it can be many different types, many different attitudes we can have towards the object. We can think many different things. Also, maybe we want that clock, or we don't like the clock, or that is samskara. But Vijnana is just a mere cognition of something. And that's quite difficult to actually recognize. Like we can understand what the idea means, but to actually districate our experiences from the usual confusion, where we don't even distinguish between nama and rupa, basically. Well, when it comes to Vijnana, it's quite difficult to actually relate to what it is. So it is said, it is taught at last. That's why the order. So this is the 5 aggregates in brief. So the 5 aggregates include all the entities which arise due to causes and conditions. Any entity you can imagine which has come into existence due to causes and conditions can fall within the 5 aggregates. all of them. Either, for example, in the case of Rupa, there is inner Rupa and outer Rupa. The personal Rupa and the Rupa outside. So, in my case, my hand falls under the personal Rupa, the table falls under the outer Rupa. So these 5 aggregates can include all the entities which are dependently arising. So that's our first type of classification. The second type of classification, now we are going to first recite it. Dwadasha Ayatanani Chakshuhu Shrotram Ghanam Jihva Kaya Mana Ayatanam Rupam Shabda Gandha Rasaha Sparsha Dharmayatanam Cheti. So these 12 ayatanas are called entrances because they allow consciousness to come about. They allow the entrance or the coming about of consciousness. And they are divided into inner and outer. This refers to the 5 perceivers and the 5 objects of perception. So, the 6 perceivers and the 6 objects of perception. The first 5 are sense faculties. These fall under Rupa. Sense faculties refers to very subtle entities which normally we are unable to perceive, which are found, for example, inside the eye. These are very clear type of Rupa. And this very clear type of Rupa allows for the arising of consciousness. So when this very clear type of Rupa comes into contact with the object, the continuum of consciousness arises as a visual consciousness. So they allow the continuum of consciousness in the next moment to arise as a visual consciousness. In the case of the chakshu, the first one. Shrotram means the ear, same thing for auditory consciousness. Granam, the nose. Jihva, kaya, and manaha is the mind. So this includes all types of consciousness, but refers only to consciousness, not to mental derivatives. So part of nama is included in the mana ayatana. And then we have the 6 objects, which are visible form, rupa. Here the word rupa is used in a smaller way. It only refers to visible form, not like in Rupa Skanda, so the meaning is more restricted. It's only visible form. Rupa, Shabda, sounds, Gandha, which is smells, Rasaha, flavor, Sparsha, things which we can touch, and Dharma Ayatana, which means all the objects of the mind. The Dharma Ayatana also includes mental derivatives, because these can be perceived by the mind. So, in this, you can notice that what is subdivided much more is Rupa. We have much more subdivision of Rupa. In the 5 aggregates, it wasn't much subdivided. Also, another point is that the 5 aggregates include only the dharmas which are dependently arisen, which are caused by causes and conditions. The 12 entrances also include permanent dharmas. The Vaibhashikas believe that there are 3 classes of permanent dharmas which are not brought about by causes and conditions. These are called the non-produced dharmas, asamskrita. So these non-produced dharmas cannot be included in the aggregates because of the meaning of the word aggregate. We cannot heap them up. So they are included in the ayatanas, they are included in the last ayatana, the dharma ayatana. So the three unconditioned or unproduced factors, which are space and the two types of cessation, are included there. So the ayatana is a more complete classification in the sense that it also includes non-produced dharmas. Okay, I think that can be okay for a very brief introduction to the ayatanas. No, there's one more thing I wanted to tell you. If you can't remember the order of the ayatanas, do you know how you can remember it easily? You know what is the way to remember the order of the ayatanas? Exactly. Their place in your body. It goes from high to lower. Chakshu is higher. Shrotra is a little bit lower. Grana is a little bit lower. Jihva is a little bit lower. And then there is Kaya. And Mana has no place. So that's the way to remember it. Remember where they're placed on the body. It's one way to help. Then we have the 18 bases, and now we are going to read them again. Ashtadasha Dhatavaha Chakshuhu Shrotram Granam Jihva Kaya Manaha Rupam Shabdaha Gandhaha Rasaha Sparshaha Dharmadhatuhu Chakshurvijnanam Shrotra Grana Vijnanam Jihva Vijnanam Kaya Vijnanam Mano Vijnana Dhatuscheti. So this classification is similar to the previous one, but it analyzes both Rupa and Nama. What it includes and the way it works is based on dependent arising. It's based on the way in which perception arises. So the last six dhatus, starting from the Chakshur Vijnana, the eye consciousness, so you can see them in English too. From the eye consciousness onwards, you have the resultant consciousness. What are the causes and conditions for consciousness to arise? Consciousness needs a point of reference. Like, for example, if it's visual consciousness, it will be the... Oh, I didn't translate. That's funny. I translated only 12 of them. I just realized. Anyway, you can look at it here, where you have the Sanskrit and English. I didn't translate the objects. Or did I? No, here it is. Okay, these are the objects. So visible form is the object. And then it needs a support, a basis. The basis is the 5 faculties, the 5 sense faculties, plus what is called the manodhatu. This, the mind dhatu, the mind base. What is the mind base? This is a slightly tricky question. I'll try to explain again because maybe this is a little bit more complicated than the previous one. When we have a moment of visual consciousness, let's say we see a patch of red, like I turn around, I see that patch of red, which then I recognize as a chair. That is based. For that to arise, I need 2 things. I need that patch of red, which is its object, and I need the eye faculty. These 2 come together and my visual consciousness arises. For mental consciousness doesn't arise based on one of the 5 faculties. So what it arises based upon is any of the 6 consciousness but a previous moment. So my previous moment of visual consciousness can in turn be the basis for the arising of my mind consciousness. That's why we have this particular base there, because it explains what is the support for the arising of mental consciousness. So mental consciousness is based on what is called the base of the mind, which is any of the 6 consciousness but one previous moment. So if I have a mental consciousness of that patch of red, that is based on the patch of red and on my previous visual consciousness. That's what functions as the basis. So this is a slightly tricky part of the 18 ayatans. 18 dhatus. It's something that many people forget. I like to always do this experiment. I explain this to somebody or to a class, and then maybe I meet them after 3 weeks and I ask them to explain what is the Mano Dhatu. Usually everyone forgets this explanation. It's quite an interesting experience. For some reason, it just doesn't stick. But so, if you know it beforehand, you can keep this in mind and reflect about it when you study again. So I'll also send you some text that you can use. I'm not just expecting that you remember everything I say. But please keep this point in your memory, that when it comes to the Mano Dhatu, there is some difficulty. If you think about it, there is some difficulty because it looks like a reduplication. We already have all the 6 classes of consciousness in the last 6 dhatus. So what is this Mano Dhatu? It looks like a repetition. And the answer is, yes, it is a repetition. It again refers to the 6 classes of consciousness, but a previous moment which functions as the basis for the Mano Vijnana. So this is different from the way in which the teaching of the aggregates and the entrances works. Because this is meant to explain to us how the process of perception arises. It takes into account an explanation of causality. You see, there is one more rationale behind this particular subdivision. So, now you have some idea that, for example, when you read this, you see that this refers to things that we normally experience. Actually, it refers to everything that we normally experience. So you know that it's something that is meant to help us undo certain misunderstandings about our experience. Normally, the way we understand things is that I exist and I'm perceiving a chair. That's it. That's all what we relate to. So when we study the Skandha, Ayatana and Dhatu, this idea should change. The idea becomes something different. The idea becomes that in this location there is one moment of the eye faculty, there is one moment of a patch of physical form. They come together. Thanks to that, a moment of consciousness arises. So you see, we understand it as an impersonal process. It's due to the coming together of causes and conditions. And these causes and conditions do not include a person. There is no person apart from a name that we give to the collection of the 5 aggregates or 12 entrances or 18 bases. So there is a collection of different entities which are causally related. They operate in a causal continuum. So the reason why conventionally I can still use names for people is because this moment of the 5 aggregates is connected to my previous moment of 5 aggregates, but is not connected causally in the same way to the previous moment of any of the 5 aggregates sitting there. So I can distinguish. Because of this causal continuity. But it's just a name. When you think of a person, it's just a name. So that is the point of the teaching of the aggregates, and the other teachings too. The example given is very famous example, the example of a chariot. If you think of a chariot, you start reflecting, where is that chariot? Is it in the wheels? Is it in the upper part? Is it in the lower part, etc., etc.? And then after a while you just realize that there are all these pieces, but where is the chariot? The chariot is just a name that due to my habit I give to these pieces when they're in a certain shape. I expect that it will be used in a certain way, and they call it a chariot. So due to our habituation, there are certain possible bases for us to form some designations. We designate that as a chariot. And after a while it becomes automatic. In the beginning, maybe we need to be taught. Certain objects we might not even recognize as being objects until somebody comes and explains what they are. Until then, maybe we just perceive them as some strange shape. If you go to a foreign country with a completely different culture, you may or may not recognize that certain things are discrete objects. You may not know which ones go together, which ones are separate objects. It's not always so clear. Much of it is because of the way we are used to perceiving those objects. So, a person is in the same way. A person is formed out of habit. The fact that we don't recognize this is because of samsara. The primary cause of samsara is that we think that there is a person. And therefore, once again, the mind will take up some rupa. There will be a continuity with which, and the mind will continue to arise with this grasping at a self. So it's an impersonal process which thinks it is personal. That is the point. We are impersonal processes which which are very convinced to be permanent people. So our normal perception is very deluded. And studying about skandha, dhatu and ayatana is meant to counteract that delusion. Okay, so this was the short introduction to the aggregates, entrances, and bases. So at this point, before I go into something more detailed, maybe I can ask you if you have some questions. If some things were not clear, you want to discuss something, we can now discuss a little bit, and then we can go on to something else. Do you have any questions? No questions? If you don't have any questions, I must worry a lot. When there is no question whatsoever, it's either because you understood everything absolutely perfectly, or because you understood so little that you don't feel confident to ask a question. But if it is the second case, then you should ask a question. Don't hesitate thinking that, oh, this question is just because of my misunderstanding, or this question is too simple. Because the purpose of asking a question is precisely to clarify that lack of understanding. So So if you have a question, even if it sounds to you like, oh, maybe it's too basic, don't worry, you can ask it. There's no harm in repeating.
Teacher, why we can't realize all this exists in our life, in our daily life?
Why we cannot?
Cannot realize. When we are in the daily life, we are operate in the daily life. Normally, we did not recognize all this in detail.
Short answer is because of lack of merit and wisdom, of accumulation of merit and wisdom. Longer answer, usually it is explained, is because normally we don't have shamatha. So, if we think about this, is already very good. But when we try to see something without shamatha, our mind does not see very clearly. And it doesn't have a very strong impact. So, it is said that the samahita citta yata bhutam prajanati, something like this. A mind which is in samadhi can see things as they are. So the point is, when we are in our usual activities, our mind is very scattered. It doesn't have that power, that focus. So we can think about this, and it's already very good. Actually, we can. Like, one can try to just keeping it in mind is already an exercise. Like, if when one is doing other things, one keeps in mind nama rupa, one keeps in mind the five aggregates, tries to recognize a little bit of what's happening in terms of the five aggregates or the entrances, etc. Of course, that is already something. But to have a very immediate recognition of the aggregates is very difficult. Also because they're momentary. We don't perceive momentary things. All our habituation is to extended things through time. We don't even sometimes perceive coarse impermanence. If you think about it, most coarse level of impermanence, our own impermanence, normally we are not really aware of it. So that is a good example to understand why we don't understand it in daily life. In daily life, even something as simple to understand that we ourselves are impermanent is not within the field of our awareness normally, because we are distracted by other things. And those other things are actually based on the idea that we are permanent very often. Many of the activities that we do usually are very often based on the idea that we are permanent and that we are a permanent person. So in some sense, our whole usual world, like human society or even animals, is based on an idea of self. So our usual daily activity, in some sense, can go very much against that. So the way in which one bridges that usually is through Shila, discipline. Discipline goes against our normal tendencies, and it promotes smriti, mindfulness. So that is the basis to be able to be a little bit less immediately involved with what one is doing. So have a little bit of mental space. That discipline is a very good method. So that's why there is this progression, Shila, Samadhi and Prajna. So I don't know if this answers your question or not. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question here. For the 18 bases, it seems that the first 12 are similar to the 12 entrances, right?
Exactly.
So just wonder what is the significance of breaking this into 12 entrance and 18 bases rather than just break into 12 entrance and 6 bases? Because of the 18, the last 6 in fact is the consciousness. So just I would like to understand why we have to break into these two groups.
In the case of the 12 entrances, the mind ayatana includes all the consciousnesses, and there is no distinction between the present consciousness and the immediately previous consciousness, because we are not concerned with this process of dependent arising of perception. In the case of the 18 bases, we are explaining the dependent arising of perception, and therefore the mind base includes the 6 consciousness, but only the previous one, the one which works as a basis for the arising of consciousness. So that's why we have both.
So that means these two groupings have two different applications. For example, the 18 bases is more used to explain the...
These I'm going to tell you in more detail,
Okay.
because there is 3 reasons to have these differences. So basically your question is something which has been pointed out by Benny Buddhist master. Isn't it a reduplication? If this can include all entities, then why do it twice? According to Sautrantikas, even the aggregates can include all entities because they don't believe in non-produced entities. So for them, all 3 can include everything. Then it looks like it's a complete reduplication. Why do we have these 3? But there are 3 different answers for that. Well, I can anticipate it, no problem. Moha, Indriya, Rujit, Traidhat, Isra, Skandhadi, Deshanama. Because there are 3 types of delusion, because there are 3 types of faculty, ability, and because there are 3 types of preference, predilection. So, in regards to delusion, some people grasp at mostly mind and mental derivatives as being a self. So they when they identify a self, when they grasp at a permanent self, what they are confusing to be a self is mind and mental factors, nama. For those people, the better teaching is the teaching of the skandhas, because it focuses on breaking up nama. If you check the teaching of the aggregates, Rupa is all in one aggregate. There's not so much analysis of Rupa. What is analyzed more is nama. The ayatanas are better for people who mostly grasp at Rupa, because 10 ayatanas and a half are Rupa. The only ayatanas which include nama are the mana ayatana, the mind entrance, and the dharma ayatana, the entrance of objects of the mind. Only that includes nama. So the analysis of nama is very small. So this is better for people who mostly grasp at the body as being their self. The teaching on the 18 dhatus is for those people who grasp at both. So if you check the teaching on the 18 dhatus, it analyzes both nama and rupa. So this is the first reason to have all 3. So it's for different people. Second reason is faculty, capacity. Capacity means people can have very quick learning, very sharp faculties. People can be medium faculties, or people can be slower faculties. And here, quick and slow mean in terms of understanding selflessness. For people who can understand quickly, the teaching of the aggregates is better. It's the shortest. For people who are in the middle, the teaching of the entrances is better. For people who are a little bit slower, they need a bit more analysis. The teaching on the dhatus is better because there is more analysis. Third reason, preference. Some people prefer shamatha, some people prefer vipassana. So some people emphasize shamatha a little bit more, some people emphasize vipassana a little bit more. Those people who want to emphasize shamatha should focus on the aggregates because it's shorter, less analysis. Those people who want to have a kind of in-between entrances. And those people who want to emphasize vipassana should study the dhatus because there is more analysis. So these are three reasons. There's also more reason. There's one more reason that, but this we will read in the commentary. But so these teachings are antidotes. If we didn't have a concept of self, we wouldn't need to hear about the skandha dhatu and ayatana. They are antidotes, and therefore they are adjusted to the people who are going to use them as antidotes. That's why there is some difference. Yeah?
In which sutta we can see the further explanation for these 12 entrances and 18 bases? In which particular sutta?
Artha Vinishchaya Sutra, for example, the one that I have in this PDF at the beginning. The Artha Vinishchaya Sutra, this is its explanation. And if you are referring to Pali Suttas, then you can check the Samyutta, like the Kanda Samyutta, or you can check the Bahudhatuka Sutta. That also is available in Sanskrit. Whether you are looking at the Pali tradition or you are looking at the Sanskrit tradition as also preserved in Chinese, there's many suttas and sutras which discuss skandha dhatu and ayatana. Many of them take them for granted. So this is one of the lists that when you read a Buddhist text might be referred in brief. They will say the 5 skandhas are like this. If you don't know what the 5 skandhas are, you don't know what's going on. Famous example, the Heart Sutra. If you want to understand the Heart Sutra, you need to know this list. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on. In the Heart Sutra, some of the lists are not given in all. They just say from this to this, and they skip what is in between. If you don't know the 18 dhatus, you won't know what they say. So that's why I'm saying it's the ABC of Buddhism. This is the type of list which is taken for granted. If you want to read Buddhist texts, you should know this by heart, basically. And of course, becoming acquainted with the aggregates and entrances and bases is very often encouraged in the sutras. Even Mahayana sutras, that's another point. People think that in Mahayana they don't teach these things. That's completely wrong, it's not true. There's plenty of discussions about aggregates, bases, and entrances in Mahayana sutras and shastras. So even the Mahayana philosophical treatises discuss this at length. It's really important. Unfortunately, it's not so popularly studied. Even this basic reflection of Nama Rupa, in my experience so far, usually is perceived to be too technical. I understand why. The reason is perhaps rather simple, which is in part already highlighted by the question of Venerable Genro, which is it's far from our daily experience. So usually we tend to study things which we can easily relate to. And therefore we don't focus on those things which seem very different from what we normally perceive or think. But of course, from the perspective of Buddhist training, that doesn't work very well. Because the idea is that our ordinary experiences are fundamentally deluded. So it's quite obvious that when we read a teaching which describes what is considered to be a more genuine description of sentient experience, it's going to sound different from what we're used to. That has to be. If it didn't, it would be really strange. Then we should wonder, how is it going to work as an antidote? If it's just repeating what we're used to, then it's not really a teaching. So, personally, I think for those of you who want to study Buddhist philosophy, becoming acquainted with these particular three lists is going to be helpful for a very long time. You will encounter them again and again, and this time you will notice them. Because this is one point. When you don't know the list, you read some text, you don't notice that they are there. Some of you might have read the Diamond Sutra. Did you recognize some of these lists in there? Some of you might have read the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng. Did you recognize that some of these lists are there? Some of these classifications are there? Maybe not. Why is it that we don't recognize? Because we don't know the list. It's pretty simple. If we're not familiar with the list before, but that's what I mean, they are the ABC. When we don't know the letters, we don't recognize the words. Similarly, we don't really know what these sutras are talking about, because we are not familiar with this basic list. So when they're making an implicit reference to this list, expecting that the whole audience already knows it because it's ABC, we just get a little confused. For example, in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Fine. What does form refer to? No idea. You ask 90% of the people who recite the Heart Sutra, you ask them, what does form mean? Blank. Nothing. Then you don't know what it means, you don't know what is it makes no sense, the whole thing, if you think about it. Okay, maybe you still can get inspired. That form there is the form aggregate. In fact, right next it is said, in the very same way, Vedana, Samnya, Samskara, and Vijnana, the other four aggregates. But if you don't know that there is a list of 5 aggregates, you even wonder, why don't they mention these 4 particular things? It's so weird. First he said form, then suddenly feeling. Looks like, okay, he's talking about a random collection of things and just saying that they're empty, they're empty, they're empty. Why these things? Oh, we don't know. Maybe just anything that came to his mind, he said it's empty. That's the Heart Sutra. Whatever comes to your mind, say it is empty. So, this is the kind of relationship to the Heart Sutra if we don't know these lists. But if you know the list, you know, first is teaching that the 5 aggregates are empty. Then you find the 12 entrances. Then you find the 18 bases. Then you find the 12 limbs of dependent arising. So it's actually all the classification of dharmas from the most basic to the most exalted, up to the obtainment of liberation. So if you see, there is a gradation there. The point being that whether you think of the most basic of all dharmas or the most exalted of all dharmas, they're all empty. So, I think they're very important if we want to know Buddhist philosophy. If we don't want to know Buddhist philosophy, they're not important, of course. But this course is about Buddhism, so I think in that case, it's better if you put some effort. I know that in the beginning, some people feel bored, some people feel, oh, it's so dry, it's so uninspiring. But actually, when you get the hang of it, when you start understanding its purpose, when you start reflecting it's such a different perspective from what we're used to that it should be interesting. Just even the fact that somehow we're not even taught that explicitly, actually, in school. We're not taught that explicitly, but because of the way we are taught in school, we very quickly get this idea that the mind is the brain. And we grow up with that conviction, which we never reflect upon. We don't know all the philosophical problems in that kind of conviction. We just think it's the simplest explanation. Scientists always look at things very carefully. First of all, it's based on authority. Strictly speaking, if you think about it, it's not based on your experience or reasoning. Unless you're a neuroscientist, you're just relying on somebody else's word. You have no way to check it. If you're not trained in neuroscience, you have no way to check that claim. First of all, not all neuroscientists make that claim. Many don't. Point number one. Point number two, even if you want to check the claim of some of them who might say that, either you're trained in neuroscience and you go and do the experiments yourself, or you're just relying on authority. It's just hearsay. So just imagine, our whole idea about our whole life is gossip. It's quite amazing. It's something that I think we should kind of be shocked at ourselves. How can I make my whole life, my whole convictions come from some gossip? I read on Facebook that scientists said that if you do this, this happens in the brain. Amazing. Okay, what does it mean? It means nothing. You were not there. You don't know how they measured it. You don't know whether even the interpretation of the data is reliable. Is it reliable to use numbers and geometrical patterns to understand something which is not a number and not a geometrical pattern? Why? It's not so simple. But we have a kind of immediate trust. Because it's a little bit the way we are trained in school, that science is very reliable. We are taught science. We are not taught the philosophy of science. So we are taught a very simplistic, uncritical acceptance of science. And that effectively becomes our religion. We might think we are Buddhist, but by view, we end up being materialist. It happens, I think, to anyone in the world, not just Buddhists, but unfortunately, then it's very difficult to understand these things. But if we recognize this difficulty, we shouldn't get discouraged. We should feel it's very interesting. What? The mind has no location in space? What does it mean? Then when I think, where is it happening? The point is, where is a thought? It's not that the mind is somewhere, but rather the somewhere is a thought about things. So you can reverse that whole perspective. At the very least, even if we don't become convinced about it, it should be a little bit interesting. Just think about it. It's a possibility of looking at everything in a completely different way. So at the very least, it should tell us that the way in which we look at things normally maybe is not so correct. At least maybe. Like, even if just we get a little bit of doubt, I think we should become interested. Because there is a distinct possibility that all our activities and thoughts are based on a complete misunderstanding. So that's the point of this kind of teaching. It's a risky, just think about it. If you suddenly, if you thought, if your whole life you thought you are a general from the 16th century, and you went around talking to everyone as if you're a general, giving them orders, very convinced that you're a general from the 16th century, and you speak in a very strange way, and you see that something is not working, but you have this very strong conviction. If somebody comes and tells you, you're not a general from the 16th century, you were born in Penang like 50 years ago, and you were never in any war, you should get a little worried, right? Because all what you have done was wrong. So it's something similar but more drastic. When we hear about the Skandadaton Ayatan, it's more drastic. Like the mistake is much bigger if you think about it. It's much more basic. So most of the things we have done are completely crazy. From one perspective, we're completely delusional from this perspective. So, okay, I should talk for myself. Maybe you're all generals from the 16th century. But yes, at least just this possibility should interest us. Moreover, if really we want to understand Buddhist philosophy, if then we cannot digest any of it, it's difficult to progress. But did you get at least a little bit the idea of the aggregates, entrances, and bases? Do you have some idea?
Yes.
Okay. The purpose of what I've said so far was just to give you some idea. So there will be some repetition in this class, as you have noticed. So now we are going to chant again, which I encourage you to do at home as much as you can. This way you learn some vocabulary, you become acquainted a little bit with Buddhist vocabulary. So now we are going to chant the part about the Upadana Skandha, the aggregates of clinging. Ah, yes. So I just say it and you say it. Tatra Bhikshavaha Katame Panchopadana Skandhaha Tadyatha Rupopadana Skandhaha Vedanopadana Skandhaha Samyopadana Skandhaha Samskaropadana Skandhaha Vijñanopadana Skandhaha Ime Bhikshavaha Panchopadana Skandhaha. So here the Buddha is talking to the monks and he says, then, O monks, what are the 5 aggregates of clinging? And then lists them. And it's the same list that we learned earlier, plus the word upadana, which means clinging. So this list refers to the aggregates of ordinary people, not the aggregates of people who are liberated. So, now I'm going to explain these aggregates on the basis of a commentary. And don't worry about what's going to appear on the screen, because you will not be able to read it, I suspect, although I'm not sure. Maybe some of you can read it. If you can, I'm very happy. If you can't, it doesn't matter. So there is a commentary on this sutra which is extraordinarily helpful. Very, very helpful commentary. And I'm going to tell you what this commentary says about these skandhas. So, actually there is a shorter there is a shorter list that is listed before, which just is the one we read before, basically. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Samskara, Vijnana, without the word Upadana. So the first part of the commentary, I make it bigger but just for myself, so don't worry. The first part of the commentary explains the first list, where we don't have the word clinging. So in this sutra, the standards, the aggregates, are taught twice. First as a list, which doesn't include the word clinging, and then as a list with the word clinging. And he will explain why. So he says, actually I could do something. Maybe this will help you. I can put a translation. I will project a translation of this, and I will read the Sanskrit from here. And then maybe I will tell you where I don't agree with the translation. I don't always agree with others' translation. It's normal. This is actually a good translation, and it's the text I would like you to read. This is a translation of the sutra with a commentary. If you want to have a somewhat precise idea of basic Buddhism, this text is fantastic. It's the translation of the Artha-Vinishtha Sutra together with its commentary by Professor Santani. And I can send it to you, or you can get it from here. So topic 1, the 5 aggregates. Okay, very good. He also gave again a translation of a part of the sutra, so it's quite nice, it's useful for us. Okay, so the sutra is what monks are the 5 aggregates, and then there's the list of the aggregates. The first sentence is slightly wrongly translated. It's a bit wrong, but it doesn't matter. The first sentence is not so crucial, so it doesn't matter. So, the way in which a traditional commentary works is that every word is explained. So you see, here we have the word what monks, and this is explained. So what monks indicates a question, and when it starts with namely, which in Sanskrit is tadyatha, indicates that this is an answer. So there is something in the text which tells us this is a question, and then there is an answer. In this case, the Buddha himself is asking the question, and then is giving the answer. The word namely points towards the aggregate of form and the rest. That simply means that when we say namely, it refers to what follows. So it's nothing special. Okay, so this is an important point though. He says, what is explained here are the aggregates without outflow. Okay, you may not know what outflow is. There's 2 types of dharmas. According to Vasubandhu, the most basic classification of dharmas is with outflows and without outflows. Sasrava, anasrava dharma. What's the difference between the 2? They're called with outflows because the outflows, which refers here to the mental defilements, remain latent in them. So they can be basis for the outflows to obtain full force. Most of the dharmas, most of the entities are called with outflows. All the entities which are dependent on causes and conditions are said to be with outflows. What it means is that when we see something like a table, a chair, a person, a clock, it can give rise to our mental defilements. In future, mental defilements will come from that. So what is the only thing that doesn't give rise to mental definements? The truth of the path. The Marga Satyam. The truth of the path, anything which is included within the truth of the path, is an antidote to mental defilements. So when we are seeing things in accordance to that, it doesn't give rise to mental defilements. At least it doesn't encourage them. It doesn't bring them to full force and maturation. So when we have to choose which entities to engage with, from that perspective, the only type of entity that we should try to engage with as much as possible is the path, the truth of the path. So that's the point of with outflows and without outflows. When we have the first list of aggregates, he explains that this has to refer to the aggregates without outflows, because later we have the other list, which is the clinging aggregates, and these are the aggregates with outflows. So to understand what the first one means, we just go by exclusion. So this is what this part is explaining. In that case, when we are saying that these are the aggregates without outflows, in the case of what is the aggregate without outflows for Rupa, for the aggregate of form? And he says, this is when a yogi is in samadhi, he has entered samadhi, samapanna, so he has samapatti, he has entered absorption, and has entered the noble path. So he's an Arya. And is in the state of Rupa Avinyapti Lakshana. Avinyapti Rupa is a special type of Rupa accepted only by the Vaibhashika. So the Vaibhashikas accept that there is a type of Rupa, a very subtle Rupa, which is formed when we take vows, when we do karmic actions, or when we have samapatti. So that's the type of Rupa that the yogi is producing when he's a noble one. So that kind of special Rupa is what we mean here. And whatever feeling is found in aggregate group in the Kalapa is called the aggregate of feeling. So what it means is, when that yogi is having this samapatti, this absorption, he also might have some kind of vedana, some kind of feeling, whether it is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, pro or neutral. That feeling is called the feeling without outflows. Same thing for perception, sanya, and also all the other types of mental factors. And in this case is also including the factors or compositional producing factors disassociated from the mind. This is a special category of the Vaibhashika, and I will explain it again. And consciousness, same thing. Whichever consciousness is there when he's having that kind of samapatti. Okay, this part, it's a bit difficult because he actually has introduced some things that he didn't yet explain. So it just get a general idea, but I've tried to explain it a bit so that when you read it again on your own, maybe it becomes easier. Now he explains the actual aggregates of clinging, where he offers the definitions of the aggregates, which is what interests us the most. So once again, we start from the list. So this is what we read in Sanskrit, that which is translated just here. Okay, these parts explain again how the basic wording of the question and answer works up to here. Now we have some of the important parts. So, what's the main purpose? That's the first point he's going to make. why do we have this teaching on the aggregates? And he explains it has to do with Atma Graha. Atma Graha. So, Atma Graha means grasping at a self, perceiving a self, clinging to a self. So the main purpose of the aggregates is destroy this clinging to a self. They want to show that there is neither more nor less object of clinging to a self. So when we say the 5 aggregates, these are the 4 objects that we take when we cling to a self. So what the text is saying is that those who do not know reality, Adrishta Tattva actually means people who have not seen reality. So people who have not seen reality, so ordinary people, normally, for the most, take the consciousness itself as being the self. So what one mostly identifies with is consciousness, the aspect of experience that one identifies with most is consciousness. And then they take the other aggregates to be what belongs to the self. So for example, we say my feeling, my notion. This is our normal idea. Consciousness, on the other hand, is what we immediately identify as being us. Our perception, the continuum of our basic experience. That most basic continuum of experience is what we identify with. All the other details we consider to belong to us. So this is the point. We say my body. Most people don't think I am the body. Well, nowadays maybe it's more common. But usually we say it's my hand, my feeling. When you feel cold, you don't identify with the cold. You think the cold belongs to you, but you don't identify with the cold normally. So this is the difference. When you feel happy or sad, you say it's my sadness. You don't identify with the sadness. You don't think that you are the sadness. So this is also true for samskara. When you have an idea or a concept, you think it's your idea or your concept. You don't identify with it. So that's why it is said, for the most, people tend to identify primarily with consciousness as the self, and then they take all the rest as belonging to the self. When we say the 5 clinging aggregates, what do we mean by clinging? Upadana. We mean the mental defilements, klesha. Attachment, aversion, confusion. There's a possible objection. So somebody says, when we are talking about the aggregates, what we should include is not everything, not all entities, but only the ones which fall within sentient beings. The word beings actually refers to sentient beings, like human beings, dogs, cows, gods. All of these are sentient beings. So his point is, when we are talking about Upadana Skandha, it seems senseless to include tables. The tables don't cling to themselves, and no mind. Where are the defilements in the table? The tables don't have defilements. There's no question of that. So that's what he's saying. They are the natural outflow, or they are drenched, but maybe Abhishyamnita, I think it means they are natural outflow of defilements. This is a wrong translation, I'm sorry. I should correct this translation. I'll tell you what you see this translation, with the aggregate of clinging because their actions are drenched with defilements. This translation is wrong. What the text actually says is, because the cause of these clinging aggregates of a sentient being is karma drenched by kleshas. Is karma, which is the natural outflow of mental defilements. So karma, you see, the example, what he's thinking of is an example which is given in the sutras of seed and sprout. So when in the next life we get the new aggregates. Why do we get the new aggregates? Karma functions as the seed and mental defilements function as the water. That is why it is sufficient to remove mental defilements to become liberated. We cannot remove all our karma. But no problem, because that karma is like a dry seed. If it is not sprinkled by the mental defilements, it's not a sufficient cause for a new birth. So that's what the text is saying. This is a wrong translation. So, the point that he's making is, when we think of the aggregates of a sentient being, the reason why we got these aggregates is this karma drenched by the mental defilements, watered by the mental defilements. But this is not true for this table. So why do I call it Upadana Skandha? How am I going to include it in that? It doesn't seem to make any sense. So this is the meaning of this question, which here is not very well translated. The answer is, interesting answer, another very, how to say, counterintuitive, anti-scientific idea, something that is very hard to swallow for modern people. He says, actually this too, this table also is produced by defilements. Why? Karmajam loka vaichitriam is what Vasubandhu says in the Abhidharma Kosha. The manifold world, so the manifoldness, the many things that are in the world are created, are produced by karma. So the reason why there is this table is because of our collective karma. The reason why we live in a certain place, meaning a certain world sphere, which has certain characteristic, is due to our collective karma, which was produced due to defilements. So actually, even the external world is connected somehow to our defilements. That's what produces it. So you see, again, this is a problem for many modern Buddhists. Because, okay, there is a criticism of a creator God in Buddhism. You know this, right? Buddhism doesn't believe that the world was created by somebody. But when some non-Buddhists criticize the Buddhism, they say things must be created by something with a mind. Sometimes what they answer is, oh, we agree. The whole world was created by some mind. The difference is, we don't think it's one mind. It was created by the collective karma of all the sentient beings in that world. That's how the whole world came about. It's what propelled the elements to start taking a certain shape, which then gives rise to a habitable universe. So in that sense, this is of course different from our modern ideas. The basic difference is this. When modern theories about how the universe is created are brought forth, they are all based on visible elements. so elements which would be like physical matter. From the Buddhist point of view, the main cause for everything is the mind. So this is a big difference. So in this respect, this again is something that we might not very easily relate to. But from a Buddhist point of view, even the way this room looks somehow is connected to our past karma. So this is the answer that he gives. So in that sense, we can say Upadana Skandha, even when we are referring to outer things of Rupa. So this is the first explanation of the word Upadana Skandha. Then there is another explanation, is that Upadana Skandha as a compound should be understood slightly differently. The other reason we may call them Upadana Skandha is if they are governed by clinging. So in that case it means the aggregates governed by clinging, controlled by clinging. Just like when we say Raja Purusha. Raja Purusha means the king's man. King's servant, maybe not, royal servant is not a very, very clear example, because we are talking about the expression clinging aggregates. Just like when we say king's man. So when we say king's man, what it means is the man who is controlled by the king. And when we say the clinging aggregates, it means the aggregates which are controlled by mental defilement. That's why we call them clinging aggregates. And also they give rise to a next existence. Since they are under the control of mental defilement, these aggregates become the causes for a new existence. Okay, now we have the definitions of each of the aggregates. So the aggregate of form, Rupa, is the 5 faculties, the 5 objects of the faculties, and what is called unmanifested or non-cognizable forms. This is Vaibhashika idea. So, 5 faculties, you understand? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. And this does not refer, when I say the nose, I don't mean the whole thing. When I say the eye, I don't mean the whole thing. We mean Rupa Prasada, clear form, some small entity of clear form which is inside here somewhere and which facilitates the arising of consciousness. Same thing from the ear, etc. Also their objects, so visible form, sound, smell, taste, touchable, and that's it. So, and then unmanifested form. This is a type of special category for the Vaibhashika. The Vaibhashika believe that when we take a vow, for example, when we take a vow, we do some informative action. Like we take a prostration when we take a vow, and we say some words, like Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. This activity of the body and activity of speech, in turn, creates a very subtle kind of form, which we cannot see, but it's in our body. And it continues to be there until we die. So that's how the Vaibhashikas explain that if we take a vow, even when we are not thinking about that vow, we still produce merit. That's the explanation. So, because something has happened to us, for the Vaibhashika, that's the explanation. We create a continuity when we take a vow. So, let's say, that's why there's a difference, for example, according to Vaibhashika, let's say that I don't kill anyone. That's already good. But that is not the same amount of merit as taking the vow of not killing. When we take the vow of not killing and we respect it, there is this continuity of the vow, which keeps on creating merit as long as we don't break it, even when we're not thinking about it. And this is because of this uncognizable rupa. So this is a special feature of Vaibhashika. Part of the workings of karma are explained also in terms of physical form. It's a special feature of Vaibhashika. Sautrantikas don't accept that really. So that's the aggregate of form, a brief description. Then the aggregate of feeling. The aggregate of feeling includes pleasure, pain, and neutral feeling. Okay? And also we divide it into 6 different types. It can arise from contact with the eye, and contact here means between the object and the eye, up to contact with the mind. So, all our perceivers, when they come in contact with the object of perception, that consciousness will be accompanied by a feeling, which may be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Perception, or I prefer to say notion for this particular aggregate, samnya, is the paricheda of nimitta. So distinguishing, that's good, of the signs. Signs means something which allows us to recognize something. Like when we say, oh, this is a patch of blue. No, this is yellow. This is long, this is small, etc. What it shows there has to do with the basic classification of visible form. This list is not random. The first of the senses which is listed is usually the eye. The object of the eye is visible form. Visible form is divided into color and shape. So blue and yellow is examples of color. Long and small is example of shape. That's why we have this list. And also we can divide it into 6 classes of notions according to whether it comes from the eye, the ear, etc. Just like we did with feeling.